Welcome back to the table. Today, Ryan and I are going to give you a look at an epic 4X game called Eve: War for New Eden. This is based on Eve. If you're not familiar with Eve, this game, it's a computer game.
Eve Online,
Eve Online from 2003.
2003. So it's a 20-year-old computer game.
20-year-old game. And that game, I'll admit, it was an intimidating computer game to play.
Is.
And this looks intimidating, and it is a 4X game, so it's not exactly a light affair by any means.
But they did do some interesting things with the game that I think streamlined the process of playing a 4X game a little bit, while also kind of catering to the fans of Eve Online. A lot of the things that you're going to expect from an Eve game, an emphasis on upgrading your ships and kind of building these custom fleets, of exploration, of course, managing your economy. All of those things are present here, but they do it using an action selection system that kind of limits a little bit what you can do on your turn and kind of keeps everybody on almost an even playing field as you're kind of playing through the game.
Yeah, you're going to be using actions, and effectively you have 3 free actions that you can use every round, and 2 more that you could pay for if you have the money to do it. So this is one of those games where you're going to go around the table. Someone might pass, and someone might want to spend the extra money to take more actions. And a lot of the actions are a lot of the things that you would expect in a game like this, but like Ryan said, some of them are going to play out a little differently than what you might expect from having some experience with other 4Xs.
Right, exactly. Like David said, you're breaking down your player board, and it's going to show you the different actions you can take. And there are 7 different actions available, some of which can be taken twice in a round, some of which can only be taken once. But like a lot of these games, you have your exploration, which is where you're going to be moving out on this board. And this board is built at the beginning of the game. Every player is going to have their home sector, and then you're going to have these tiles that escalate in size. As you move into the center of the board, the tiles get a little juicier. These tiles are where you're going to be expanding control with another action, moving your fleets around the board, taking control of areas, and holding those areas, of course, to exploit them for their resources. And there are a wide variety.
You've got all the X's covered.
I've got 3 of the X's so far. There's a wide variety of things that you're collecting on the board. You can be collecting some discovery tokens, which are some bonuses. You can collect minerals. There are 4 different kinds of minerals you can collect. You can collect planetary materials, production materials, moon materials. So there's a lot of different things that you can collect. But what I think is really great about this game, when you're building out the frame of the board, not only do you have your little player areas, you also have this cheat sheet that kind of talks about 3 of the maybe more complicated actions, which are build, manufacture, and trade. It's actually printed right on the board for both sides, so players can easily see what it costs to build things, what it costs to manufacture things, and the costs buying and selling for trade. So if you can't tell already, there is a lot of economic things happening in this game too.
There is quite a bit to the game. We say it's streamlined, and it is to some degree, but it is still a pretty epic game. And not only does it has that information on the board, but on your player boards, it's going to go through all of those actions that we talked about, and it has a very small, abridged description of each of those actions. You will have to read the rules. And speaking of the rules, this is definitely not a how to play, but we do want to cover some of those things. There's move, claim, and extract. Like Ryan said, when you move, you're going to be moving your ships. This is one of those games where you're targeting one of the areas you're in with your ships. And when all your ships are in one area, that is called a fleet. Mm-hmm. Then you can move those ships to up to 2 different areas. And depending on your move speed, it's going to affect that whole fleet's movement. This is basically how you're going to be moving around the board, and those numbered tiles will sort of dictate how far you can go. The further or the deeper in space you go, the more movement it's going to take. And of course, movement starts at one level for a lot of the ships, but it can go up for those ships as well. And that's just one of the many, many developments in this deck.
Yeah, every player is going to start with a set of ships, and movement speed is just one of many different stats. And if you're an EVE Online player, you're probably going to be overjoyed at the number of stats that are present. It might be a little overwhelming to see this many stats, but they do break it down. Each one of these stats is going to apply to a different aspect of the game, including that movement, including their ability to claim some of these areas. And of course, the 4th X being exterminate. It helps with their combat as well. And there is definitely combat in the game. But every player is going to start with basically the same set of ships as kind of a base and a very similar player board that has a level of income, a level of building points, and a level of research you can do over the course of the game. Now, besides just taking these actions, which we kind of have talked about all of them a little bit briefly.
A little bit.
Some of them, we could get really into the weeds. There's a lot of multi-steps to like some of these processes, but all of these actions and your ships and your combat abilities and your economy and pretty much every single thing you do in this game can be modified by playing those development cards David referenced. I think I want to go on record of saying this is the biggest deck of developments I've ever seen in a game like this.
Yeah, now these developments aren't exactly unique for every player, but there are a lot of them.
I mean, there's a ton.
They effectively represent the tech tree that you'd find in a lot of games like this. But the way this plays out is kind of interesting. You're going to put 4 developments across the top of your player board at the beginning of the game. Those are secret. You get to know them, but you put them face down, and the costs of how much research they're going to take to basically realize them are face down, so no one knows what you're up to. And as you take actions in the game, you can apply research to those and eventually flip them over, reveal them that you now have this development. These can do things, like Ryan said, to enhance your ships. Some of them allow you to then create some of the ships that you can't create right off the bat. There's a lot of different things in there. So by the end of the game, you're not going to have a very similar situation to every other player at the table. You're probably going to have quite a bit of a different sort of perspective.
Yeah, you're going to have a very asymmetric game as you go on from your starting position. I mean, just because, there's so many. I think it's 55 or something like that to choose from. It's a lot. And, of course, like, you're not just choosing these based on, your faction. You can go in any direction when you're building out these. And, of course, you're going to find combos and synergies and some cards that make your ships better. In fact, every ship, not only does it have stats, it has little technology abilities as well that unlock if you've unlocked certain developments. And that's all kind of color-coded on every card. They have little symbols to indicate. So there is a lot of looking around your board that you're going to have to do. But you are, by the end of the game, going to have a very unique fleet that was built with your specifications in mind. You can do fleets that are faster, fleets that are very nimble and hard to hit, or fleets that have very good aim. They're just so many different possible combinations.
Well, and it's not even just the ships. Like you said earlier, this deck dictates a lot of different things going on. It makes things maybe less expensive to build. It affects literally all the different things you can do in the game. You can enhance with this in a number of different ways.
Yeah, and I think that definitely adds to the replayability of the game. Like, you're looking through these and you're thinking, oh, well, this card's really juicy. I really like this ability. And then you're flipping through and thinking, this one adds to that one and makes it even better. Luckily for people like David and I, these are all noted on the bottom as to what type of upgrade they are.
Yeah.
So if you don't exactly know what you want to do, you can think, okay, well, I do want to do better at combat. Let's just look at the combat ones. Or I want my spaceships to be better, so let's look for a good spaceship upgrade. So they are kind of coded that way. So that kind of does help you guide. You're not just overwhelmed by looking at this giant stack every time.
Even though that's the case, I do think there's going to be some people at the beginning of the game when they're choosing those 4. There's going to be some people pouring through this deck.
Oh, for sure. I think the first time you play, you're going to have to spend some time.
You want to read every one of these cards before you make that decision.
For some people, I think that's intimidating, and I think other people are rubbing their hands together thinking, ooh, I can create such a juicy combo or such a juicy fleet with these cards. And you really can. Because, of course, as like any 4X game and like on EVE Online, combat is hugely important to the game. When you're moving around and exploring this board, and of course, we have a board at the very beginning of the game, very little of it's explored, but you're going to be rubbing elbows pretty quickly.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a whole element of the game where the more you control, the more you're getting in upkeep every single round. You're getting a ton of minerals, you're getting a ton of assets and materials and things like that. So if you have a pretty expensive empire, expect people to come for you and try to bring that down. But combat here is done in a way that I don't think I've ever seen before. Whenever you're in a fight, so assuming maybe that like David and I were battling here, and we'll throw some troops on the board just to make this a little more interesting, you're actually looking, players will take a side of the board, and that becomes their side. So the combat that's happening on the grid is that abstracted, all of your ships move off, and you're going to assign them based on their size to your small, medium, and large orbits. So if we had a variety of different ships in here, we could choose for one ship to be the leader of each one of those orbits, a small ship, a medium ship, and a large ship. And then whatever else happened to be in the hex, you can assign those ships to support the leader, which is an interesting, I think, combat decision you have to make. because every ship is going to have some kind of bonus or ability if it's the leader, and then other ships might have bonuses or abilities if they're support. So you're kind of wanting to build a fleet knowing that when you get into a fight, you're going to be fighting across these multiple different orbits.
Yeah, it really is kind of an interesting way of zooming in on the combat. And I do think this sort of thematically brings out the vibes of EVE Online, because the ship battles are sort of these epic things, and to see all of it in its glory is really cool. But the decisions start right from the beginning, where you're choosing those leaders. You might not even have a medium ship to use as a leader, so you don't have that orbit representative. When you are attacking, you're going to start from the small and go up to the large. If I had a small and Ryan didn't, I get to say, okay, my small orbit fleet is going to attack this ship, and it could be in one of the other orbits. He's not doing that. But otherwise, if we are both doing it, we're both going to resolve combat at the same time.
Yeah, and combat is done with dice, so there is a little bit of randomness. You do get a little bit of control, though, because every combat you're going to get to play a strategy card from your hand, face down, that the other player doesn't know about. But it really does boil down to dice. And there's a couple things that I want to talk about, because this will help you understand the level of granularity, I think, that they applied to this, is that every ship has both a defense and a difficulty to hit, which is kind of like their ability to weave around. Not only do you have to do more damage than they have their reduction, you have to hit them in the first place by rolling aiming symbols. So you've got aiming symbols and you've got damage. And you've got white dice and black dice. The white dice have more aim, but the black dice do more damage. Your small ships, if you look at the cards, all use white dice. Your medium ships use a mix of both, and your large ships only use black dice. So the large ships don't have as many opportunities to aim, but when they do hit, they hit for a ton of damage. Whereas your small ships might aim really well and hit a lot, but they're not doing as much damage, which I think is an interesting way to balance that, of course, again, depending on all the different developments you've developed over the course of the game.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and those strategy cards are really cool because it introduces a little bit of head games, because there's some interesting strategy cards here that may do some unexpected things. Yeah. You may be looking at a battle, and without strategy cards, you'd be like, well, this is probably going to play out this way, unless maybe I'll play this card. And in fact, I could really get into Ryan's head and so, I'm gonna play that card. Be all confident about it, even though he thinks, well, how could you be confident? Then he's sitting there thinking about, what did I play on this strategy card? Yeah,
and then combat plays out. I mean, there's a whole chart of different steps of combat as far as how you're assigning your damage, whether or not you're hitting.
Yes.
And then after every round of combat, you do kind of get the option to retreat, or you get the option to kind of reevaluate your orbits. So if David, for example, had blown up a couple of my ships, maybe I lose my large orbit, but I can actually readjust my fleets and kind of create new orbits for the next round of combat. And then you go back into the rolling dice and things like that. So I think that focusing in on the ship combat and giving each ship the chance to shine in battle, and also kind of letting you build your ships the way you want to via those developments, that sounds very appealing to me, but I think it would be even more appealing to somebody that's already a fan of EVE.
Yeah.
Because that is a really big part of the video game that they've captured here.
Yeah, I would say while there's other aspects of the game that have been streamlined as 4Xs go, combat is one of those things where they got a little bit more granular.
Yeah.
You're digging down. It's going to feel, I think, a lot more of like a strategic battle or like engagement,
a ship-to-ship
because
combat,
there's a lot more decision points throughout. I mean, some games could just be, okay, that's what we're doing. You roll, I won. It's not that. There's a lot of steps to this, and there's a lot of calculations that you go through, but I think, like you said, people who are fans of the property are going to appreciate that granular aspect of the combat.
Yeah, now really quick, let's talk about what you're even doing in the game, because I guess we kind of buried that lead, but it is a race to 10 points. We've seen that in other 4X games as well. So you are getting points for winning combats. So you want to fight people, you want to win combats, you want to control areas, because every round during the upkeep phase, I talked about how you get things for everything you control. You also get some victory points. If you control the most areas, you get an extra victory point. If you can hold on to the central area of the board, you get victory points. And then you have these mission cards that you're going to be dealt in the beginning of the game, and you can find ways to earn more. Those are going to give you ways to score victory points as well.
Yeah, those are going to be the kind of things that you might be able to drop on some people without them knowing, especially as it gets down close to it. People are at 9 points and things like that, and you might have just waited for the right moment, or potentially waited too long, and the variables out on the board have changed such that you can't complete this anymore. But you might be able to complete that, go, there's my last point, and get that much closer to finishing things off.
Right, and so expect a pretty epic game. I mean, this is definitely not a short game. I mean, it could be, But I don't think most EVE players or most people that play this game are just going to let the leader lead.
No.
If you start taking over a lot of areas, especially if you start building structures on the board, which are going to give you even more things during your income phase, people are going to take you down. I bet we're going to have multiple turns where nobody's scoring any victory points during that upkeep phase because nobody wants anybody to score points. Everybody has to kind of try to balance out and attack other players just to kind of keep that low. So if you don't like high conflict games, then you should probably already know that this game's not for you because it is very much. Now, there are strategies where you can win through diplomacy and through just like turtling and trying to score points in other ways, but expect people to come at you. I mean, you can't really avoid that.
No, for sure. They've made it a significant part of the main board where you take combat and it takes place. So it's definitely going to be a high conflict game. Yeah. I wouldn't say, don't expect this game to be as epic or as long, rather, as, say, Twilight Imperium.
Yeah, I think they've made it by design. And also that it's capped at 4 players. Yeah. So that's a little bit less gameplay time, but it's still going to be a multi-hour experience.
For sure. This is going to be an Eclipse level experience.
I'd put it
something
more
like
Eclipse than Twilight Imperium.
Exactly.
I don't think it's going to be an 8-hour game, but again, it's player controlled. So it all depends on if you can get ahead of the other players or if everyone's just constantly blocking each other.
Yeah, so that is EVE, War for New Eden. If you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.